I am Sarah Chen, 28 years old, and until my cousin Rachel's wedding last September, I thought I understood what humiliation felt like. Then my brother Marcus stood in front of 200 guests, pointed at my car in the parking lot, and announced to everyone within earshot that his sister drove the most embarrassing piece of junk he'd ever seen. What he didn't know was that the valet who had been admiring my car all evening was about to ask for something that would change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in Sacramento, California, I was always the practical one in the Chen family. My parents, both immigrants from Taiwan who worked double shifts at their small electronics repair shop, raised Marcus and me with very different expectations. I was 3 years older than Marcus, and from the moment I could hold a screwdriver, I was expected to help in the shop after school, learning the intricate details of circuit boards and motherboard repairs while other kids played video games. Marcus, on the other hand, was born with what my parents called golden hands. He could take apart any electronic device and put it back together perfectly, often improving it in the process. By age 10, he was already building custom gaming computers that outperformed machines costing thousands more. While I struggled to understand the technical aspects that came so naturally to him, I developed a different skill set entirely. I became the face of the family business, the one who dealt with customers, managed appointments, handled the books, and somehow convinced people to trust a teenage girl with their expensive electronics. My parents never hid their pride in Marcus's technical abilities. At family gatherings, relatives would gather around as he demonstrated his latest creation, while I stood in the background, managing the logistics that made his demonstrations possible. The phrase "Marcus is going to be famous one day" became as common in our household as discussions about the weather. Meanwhile, my contributions were acknowledged with a simple nod and the expectation that I would continue handling the business side of things. The pattern continued through high school. Marcus earned straight A's in all his STEM classes without studying, spending his free time developing apps and getting featured in local technology competitions. I worked twice as hard to maintain a B+ average, while managing our family's growing repair business, which had expanded thanks to word of mouth about Marcus's exceptional skills. College applications revealed the extent of our different paths. Marcus received a full scholarship to Stanford for computer engineering, his portfolio of innovative projects opening doors I could never have imagined. I applied to state schools, choosing business administration, not because it was my passion, but because someone needed to understand how to turn Marcus's brilliance into sustainable income. My parents supported this decision with practical resignation rather than enthusiasm. "Sarah has a good head for business," they would tell people, which felt like being praised for having functional kidneys. California State University Sacramento wasn't prestigious, but it was affordable, and I could live at home to help with the family business. While Marcus moved into Stanford's dorms and immersed himself in Silicon Valley culture, I commuted to classes in my dad's old Honda Civic, the same car I'd been driving since I turned 16. The Honda was reliable but unremarkable, with faded paint and a radio that only worked when the weather was clear. During college, something shifted in my understanding of business and technology. My professors recognized something in me that my family had overlooked. I wasn't just good with people and numbers, I had an intuitive understanding of market dynamics and consumer behavior. My senior project analyzed the disconnect between innovative technology and practical consumer needs, using examples from our family repair shop to illustrate how brilliant engineers often created solutions for problems that didn't exist. The project caught the attention of Professor Williams, who had spent 15 years in venture capital before transitioning to academia. She pulled me aside after presenting my research to suggest I consider a career in technology investment rather than small business management. "You have a rare combination of technical literacy and business instinct," she told me. "The tech industry needs people who can bridge the gap between innovation and market reality." That conversation planted a seed that grew throughout my final semester. While Marcus was landing internships at major tech companies, impressing everyone with his coding abilities, I was quietly researching investment firms and startup accelerators. The world of venture capital fascinated me because it required exactly the skills I had developed over years of translating between my brother's technical genius and our customers' practical needs. After graduation, I faced a difficult decision. My parents expected me to take over more responsibility in the family business, officially becoming Marcus's business manager when he inevitably launched his own tech company. The assumption was so deeply ingrained that they had already started referring to me as Marcus's future partner in conversations with relatives. But Professor Williams had connected me with several contacts in San Francisco's financial district, and I was invited to interview with a small but growing venture capital firm called Pacific Ventures. The interview process was unlike anything I had experienced. Rather than testing my technical knowledge, they wanted to understand how I evaluated potential investments, how I identified market opportunities, and how I communicated complex ideas to different audiences. They were particularly interested in my family background, seeing my experience in a small electronics business as valuable insight into ground-level market dynamics. I was offered a position as a junior analyst, starting at a salary that was modest by Silicon Valley standards, but significantly more than I could earn managing our family's repair shop. The decision to accept meant disappointing my parents and leaving Marcus to handle the business aspects of his career independently. It also meant admitting to myself that I had ambitions beyond supporting my brother's success. My parents received the news with confused disappointment. They couldn't understand why I would leave a family business that was finally becoming profitable to work for strangers in an industry they didn't fully comprehend. "You're abandoning your responsibilities," my mother said during one particularly difficult conversation. "Marcus needs your support to succeed." The implication was clear: my role was to facilitate his achievement, not pursue my own. Marcus himself was surprisingly dismissive when I told him about the job offer. "Investment analysis," he said with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "So you're going to spend your days telling other people how to spend their money on ideas you could never create yourself." His words stung because they contained just enough truth to be devastating. I wasn't the innovator in our family, had never been the one with revolutionary ideas or breakthrough insights. But I took the job anyway, moving into a tiny studio apartment in San Francisco and beginning what would become the most challenging and rewarding period of my life. Pacific Ventures specialized in early-stage technology investments, focusing on companies that were past the initial startup phase but not yet ready for major institutional funding. My job was to evaluate potential investments, conduct due diligence on founders and their business models, and help portfolio companies develop sustainable growth strategies. The work was intellectually demanding in ways I hadn't anticipated. Every day brought new technologies to understand, market analyses to conduct, and financial projections to evaluate. I was essentially learning to speak fluent startup, understanding not just what entrepreneurs were building, but why their solutions mattered and whether they could build sustainable businesses around their innovations. My background in electronics repair proved surprisingly valuable. Many of the companies we evaluated were developing hardware solutions or Internet of Things devices, and my practical understanding of how these technologies actually worked gave me insights that my colleagues, mostly MBA graduates from prestigious programs, sometimes missed. I could spot potential manufacturing issues, identify user experience problems, and evaluate whether proposed solutions were actually feasible for mass production. Within my first year, I had identified and helped secure investments in 3 companies that became significant successes for the firm. One was developing smart home security systems, another was creating more efficient solar panel inverters, and the third was building industrial sensors for predictive maintenance. In each case, my analysis had identified market opportunities that other firms had overlooked, leading to investments that generated substantial returns. My success didn't go unnoticed. By my second year, I had been promoted to senior analyst and was leading due diligence efforts for larger investments. My salary had increased accordingly, but I maintained the same modest lifestyle, driving the same Honda Civic and living in the same small apartment. The money wasn't the motivation; the intellectual challenge and the satisfaction of identifying winning opportunities were what drove me to work 12-hour days and spend weekends researching emerging technologies. During this period, my relationship with my family became increasingly strained. Marcus had graduated from Stanford and taken a position at a major tech company, where he was developing cutting-edge artificial intelligence applications. His work was impressive and well compensated, but he seemed frustrated by the corporate environment and frequently complained about management decisions that limited his creative freedom. Our parents remained convinced that he would eventually leave to start his own company, and they still expected me to abandon my career to support his entrepreneurial ventures. Family dinners became exercises in careful conversation navigation. Marcus would describe his latest projects with technical detail that impressed our parents, while I would briefly mention my work in terms so general that it sounded almost trivial. Sarah helps companies find investors, my mother would explain to relatives, which technically accurate but completely missed the strategic nature of what I actually did. The disconnect became more apparent during my third year at Pacific Ventures, when I was promoted again, this time to principal, a position that came with both significant responsibility and equity participation in the firm's profits. The promotion meant I was now one of the key decision-makers for investments, with the authority to approve funding for promising companies and the responsibility for their success or failure. My income had grown substantially, but more importantly, I had gained recognition as one of the most promising young investors in the Bay Area technology scene. Industry publications began featuring my investment thesis and analysis. I was invited to speak at conferences about identifying undervalued opportunities in hardware technology. Other venture capital firms started trying to recruit me, offering even more substantial compensation packages. But I remained at Pacific Ventures, partly out of loyalty to the firm that had given me my start, and partly because I had developed genuine expertise in a specific niche that I found intellectually fulfilling. My success in venture capital led to an unexpected opportunity. Several of the companies in our portfolio had performed so well that they attracted acquisition offers from major technology corporations. As the analyst who had originally identified and championed these investments, I was invited to participate in the acquisition negotiations, helping to structure deals that maximized returns for all parties involved. One particular acquisition caught the attention of the broader investment community. A company I had championed, which developed sensors for autonomous vehicles, was acquired by a major automotive manufacturer for 8 times our initial investment. The deal generated substantial profits for Pacific Ventures and established my reputation as someone with exceptional insight into emerging technology markets. The financial success of these investments had personal implications I hadn't fully considered. As a principal with equity participation, my compensation was now tied directly to the firm's performance. The automotive sensor acquisition alone generated enough commission for me to afford luxuries I had never considered necessary. But instead of upgrading my lifestyle dramatically, I made one specific purchase that had been a quiet dream for years. I had always been fascinated by classic cars, particularly those that represented significant moments in automotive innovation. During college, I had written a paper analyzing the business strategy behind the development of the original Ford Mustang, exploring how innovative design could create new market categories. The research had sparked a lasting interest in cars that combined technological innovation with elegant design. After the automotive sensor deal closed, I found myself with enough disposable income to afford a car that had been featured in automotive magazines as a masterpiece of engineering and design. The 1965 Ford Mustang Shelby GT 350 represented everything I admired about American innovation, a perfect marriage of performance engineering and aesthetic beauty. Finding one in original condition required months of searching, but eventually I located a pristine example in Arizona, owned by a collector who had maintained it meticulously for 30 years. The purchase was both emotional and practical. Emotionally, it represented a reward for years of hard work and a symbol of achieving success in my chosen field. Practically, it was also a sound investment. Classic Mustangs had been appreciating steadily, and a well-maintained Shelby GT 350 was likely to continue gaining value over time. The car was beautiful, powerful, and historically significant, everything I wanted in a vehicle that would represent my personal and professional achievements. However, I didn't tell my family about the purchase immediately. My parents would have seen it as an extravagant waste of money, particularly since they still expected me to eventually return to Sacramento to support Marcus's career. Marcus himself would likely have dismissed it as showing off or trying to compensate for something. I kept the Mustang parked in a climate-controlled garage near my San Francisco apartment, driving it only on weekends and special occasions. My career continued to flourish. By my fourth year at Pacific Ventures, I had been featured in Forbes' 30 Under 30 Inches list for venture capital, recognizing my track record of successful investments and my insights into technology market trends. The recognition brought even more opportunities, including offers to join larger firms and invitations to serve on advisory boards for promising startups. I had found my niche and was being recognized as an expert in my field. During this period, my brother's career had taken a different trajectory. After 2 years at his corporate job, Marcus had indeed left to found his own startup, developing artificial intelligence applications for small businesses. The company showed promise, and he had managed to secure some initial funding, but he was struggling with the business development aspects of entrepreneurship. His technical skills remained exceptional, but he lacked experience in fundraising, partnership development, and strategic planning. Our parents naturally assumed I would leave my position to help Marcus's company succeed. They couldn't understand why I wouldn't want to combine my business skills with his technical abilities to create what they saw as the perfect partnership. "You could be partners," my mother would say during phone calls. "Sarah handling business, Marcus handling technology. It's perfect."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The assumption that my career was secondary to his opportunities remained as strong as ever. I tried to explain that I had built my own successful career, that I was recognized as an expert in my field, that I had responsibilities to my firm and our portfolio companies. But my achievements seemed abstract to them, particularly compared to Marcus's tangible products and innovations. My success was measured in percentages and returns on investment, concepts that seemed less real than the applications and devices that Marcus created. The tension came to a head during a family dinner when Marcus announced that his startup had been accepted into a prestigious accelerator program. The news was genuinely exciting, and I congratulated him sincerely on the achievement. But when my parents started discussing how I should take a leave of absence to help him capitalize on the opportunity, I finally pushed back decisively. "I have my own career," I said, more firmly than I had ever spoken to them before. "I've worked hard to build expertise and reputation in venture capital. I can't just abandon that to become Marcus's business manager." The silence that followed was uncomfortable, but I continued. "I'm happy to offer advice and connections when I can, but I'm not available to manage his company." My parents' reaction was predictable disappointment mixed with confusion. They couldn't understand why I wouldn't want to be part of what they saw as a family success story. Marcus himself seemed more hurt than angry, as if my refusal to abandon my career for his represented a personal rejection rather than a professional decision. The conversation ended awkwardly, with everyone agreeing to disagree, but the underlying tension remained. My family still saw my career as secondary to Marcus's potential, while I had come to understand that my work was just as valuable and fulfilling as his innovations. The disconnect would continue to influence our relationships for months to come. As summer approached, we received an invitation that would bring these tensions to a dramatic climax. Our cousin Rachel was getting married in Napa Valley, with a wedding celebration that promised to bring together extended family members from across California. The invitation specified cocktail attire for the reception and suggested that guests might want to stay overnight at nearby hotels, indicating this would be a significant celebration. Rachel had always been the social center of our extended family, the cousin who organized reunions and maintained connections between relatives who might otherwise lose touch. Her wedding was being planned as a major family gathering, with relatives traveling from as far as Southern California and even some flying in from Taiwan. The event would be held at a prestigious winery, with a ceremony overlooking vineyards followed by a reception in an elegant event hall. I was looking forward to the wedding, particularly because it would be an opportunity to see relatives I hadn't visited with in years, and to share updates about my career with family members who might be more receptive than my immediate family. I was also excited about the excuse to drive my Mustang on the scenic highway through wine country, a perfect opportunity to enjoy both the car and the beautiful Northern California landscape. The decision to drive the Mustang to the wedding was practical as well as enjoyable. The venue was about 90 minutes from San Francisco, and having my own transportation would allow me to leave on my own schedule rather than coordinating with other family members. The classic car would also be appropriate for the upscale venue, fitting in well with what was clearly going to be an elegant celebration.
I spent the week before the wedding having the Mustang detailed and serviced, ensuring it would look and run perfectly for the occasion. The car was genuinely beautiful, its original Wimbledon white paint job gleaming and the iconic blue racing stripes creating dramatic contrast. The chrome was polished to mirror brightness, and the interior original black leather with white stitching was immaculate. Every aspect of the car represented quality and attention to detail. Marcus had been unusually quiet about his own transportation plans for the wedding. I assumed he would drive up with our parents or possibly rent a car, since his daily driver was a practical but unremarkable sedan that he had purchased primarily for its fuel efficiency and reliability. He had never shown much interest in cars beyond their function as transportation, seeing them as practical necessities rather than objects of aesthetic or mechanical interest. The morning of the wedding, I dressed carefully in a navy blue cocktail dress and matching heels, jewelry that complemented the elegant but understated style I had developed over my years in professional settings. I wanted to look appropriate for both the formal celebration and the family photographs that would inevitably be taken throughout the day. The goal was to represent myself well while avoiding anything that might be perceived as showing off or drawing unnecessary attention. The drive through wine country was everything I had hoped. The Mustang performed beautifully on the winding roads, its powerful engine responding smoothly to acceleration, while the classic suspension provided the firm, connected feel that made driving truly engaging. Other drivers frequently admired the car at traffic lights, some giving enthusiastic thumbs up or asking questions about its year and specifications during brief conversations at gas stations. I arrived at the winery in the early afternoon, about an hour before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. The venue was even more beautiful than the photographs had suggested, with meticulously maintained gardens surrounding a modern event facility that managed to blend contemporary elegance with respect for the natural landscape. The parking area was adjacent to the main building, visible from the cocktail reception area where guests would gather after the ceremony. As I pulled into a parking space, I noticed several other impressive cars among the guests' vehicles. Classic cars and luxury vehicles were well represented, suggesting that Rachel's social circle included people with both the means and inclination to own special automobiles. My Mustang would fit in well with this group, neither the most nor least impressive vehicle in attendance. The valet parking attendants were managing guest vehicles with obvious expertise and enthusiasm. As I stepped out of the Mustang, one of the valets approached with the kind of reverent expression that classic car enthusiasts reserve for particularly special vehicles. He was probably in his early 20s, well dressed in the standard valet uniform, but his eyes immediately went to the car rather than to me. "Is that an original GT 350? He asked, his voice carrying the mixture of excitement and respect that indicated genuine automotive knowledge. "I've never seen one this pristine." I confirmed that it was indeed an original Shelby GT 350, and we spent a few minutes discussing its history and specifications. His enthusiasm was infectious and reminded me why I had fallen in love with the car in the first place. "Would you mind if I parked it in a special spot?" he asked. "We have a designated area for the really exceptional vehicles, and this definitely qualifies." I agreed, touched by his obvious appreciation for the car's significance. He handed me the claim ticket with unusual care, as if it represented responsibility for something precious rather than routine valet service. I made my way to the reception area, where family members were already gathering and greeting each other with the mixture of genuine affection and careful politeness that characterizes large family events. Relatives I hadn't seen in months or years were eager to catch up on career developments, relationship updates, and general life news. Several asked about my work in venture capital, and I found myself having genuinely engaging conversations about technology trends and investment opportunities. My parents arrived about 30 minutes later, accompanied by Marcus, who had indeed chosen to drive up with them rather than making his own transportation arrangements. They had taken my father's reliable but aging Toyota Camry, a practical choice that ensured comfortable travel for 3 people but was unremarkable in every other respect. Marcus was dressed appropriately for the occasion in a dark suit and tie, looking handsome and professional. The family greetings were warm but carried the underlying tension that had characterized our recent interactions. My parents were proud to introduce me to relatives as their successful daughter, but the introduction still carried subtle emphasis on my role as Marcus's sister rather than recognition of my independent achievements. Marcus himself seemed slightly uncomfortable, perhaps anticipating questions about his startup that might invite unfavorable comparisons to my established career success. The wedding ceremony itself was beautiful and emotional, conducted in the winery's garden setting, with vineyard views providing a stunning backdrop. Rachel looked radiant, and her groom was clearly overjoyed to be marrying her. The celebration felt genuine and joyful, exactly what a wedding should be. Family members were moved by the couple's vows, and the atmosphere was filled with the kind of happiness that makes everyone feel optimistic about love and commitment. Following the ceremony, guests moved to the cocktail reception area, where servers provided wine from the host vineyard along with elegant appetizers. The conversation was lively and celebratory, with relatives sharing stories, catching up on family news, and generally enjoying the opportunity to spend time together in a beautiful setting. I found myself engaged in several interesting conversations about business, travel, and family history. It was during this cocktail hour that the incident occurred that would define the entire evening and fundamentally change my relationship with my brother. Marcus had been drinking wine throughout the reception, not excessively, but enough to lower his usual social filters and perhaps amplify some of the frustration he had been feeling about our recent career discussions. I was standing near the edge of the reception area, engaged in conversation with my Uncle David and his wife Patricia, both of whom had been asking thoughtful questions about my work in venture capital. They were genuinely interested in understanding how investment analysis worked and seemed impressed by my explanations of the due diligence process and portfolio management strategies. Marcus approached our conversation group, carrying a glass of wine and wearing the kind of slightly forced smile that suggested he was working to maintain social composure. "Are you telling everyone about your important job again?" he asked, his tone carrying just enough edge to make the question uncomfortable rather than playful. I tried to deflect with humor, "Just answering questions about what I do for work," I replied lightly. "You know how family gatherings are." But Marcus seemed determined to push the conversation in a different direction, perhaps motivated by alcohol or by frustration that had been building throughout our recent family discussions about career priorities. "Speaking of work," Marcus said, his voice getting slightly louder, "did everyone see what Sarah drove here today?" The question seemed innocent enough, but his tone suggested it wasn't meant as a compliment. Several family members looked toward the parking area, where various guest vehicles were visible through the reception area windows. "She bought herself a fancy sports car," Marcus continued, now speaking loud enough that other conversation groups began to notice. "I guess that's what happens when you make money telling other people how to spend theirs." The comment was clearly intended as a dig at my career, but it also mischaracterized both my work and my car purchase in ways that felt deliberately unfair. I tried to correct the record calmly. "It's a classic Mustang, and it's actually an investment as well as something I enjoy." But Marcus wasn't finished making his point, and other family members were now listening to what was becoming an increasingly uncomfortable public conversation. "An investment," Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Sarah, you bought a 40-year-old car because you wanted to show off. Just admit it." The accusation stung partly because it contained a grain of truth. I had bought the Mustang partly because I wanted something that reflected my success, but mostly because it completely ignored the thoughtful consideration I had given to the purchase. The conversation had now attracted the attention of most of the family members in our immediate area, including several relatives who didn't know about the underlying tensions between Marcus and me. They were witnessing what appeared to be a sibling disagreement about money and priorities, but they couldn't understand the deeper context of years of family dynamics and career expectations. "Let's not do this here," I said quietly, hoping to end the public discussion before it became even more uncomfortable. But Marcus seemed committed to making whatever point he was trying to make, and his next comment would prove to be the catalyst for everything that followed. "You want to know what I really think?" Marcus said, his voice now carrying clearly across the reception area. "I think my sister drives the most embarrassing piece of junk I've ever seen. She spent all that money trying to look impressive, and she ended up with something that belongs in a junkyard." The silence that followed his statement was profound and uncomfortable. Family members who had been engaged in their own conversations turned to stare at Marcus and me, clearly surprised by the harsh nature of his criticism. Several relatives looked genuinely shocked that he would speak about me so dismissively in such a public setting. I felt my face flush with embarrassment and anger. Marcus had not only insulted my car and my judgment, but he had done so in front of our entire extended family, at a celebration that was supposed to be about joy and togetherness. The humiliation was compounded by the fact that many of these relatives had just been listening to me discuss my career achievements, only to witness my own brother publicly dismissing my choices and success. "That's enough, Marcus," my father said quietly, finally intervening in what had become an obviously uncomfortable situation, but the damage was already done. Marcus had made his feelings clear in the most public and hurtful way possible, and I was left standing in front of family members who had just witnessed him humiliate me at what was supposed to be a celebratory occasion. What made the moment even more painful was that Marcus's criticism wasn't just wrong factually, it was deliberately cruel. He knew that I had researched the car purchase carefully, that I genuinely loved classic Mustangs, and that the GT350 was widely recognized as a significant piece of automotive history. His characterization of it as junk was not just inaccurate, but intentionally designed to minimize something that brought me joy and represented my hard-earned success. The immediate aftermath of Marcus's outburst was awkward for everyone present. Family members didn't know how to respond to what they had witnessed, and the celebratory mood of the reception had been damaged by the public conflict between siblings. Several relatives attempted to change the subject or redirect conversation to more neutral topics, but the tension remained palpable. I excused myself from the group and walked toward the restroom, needing a few minutes to compose myself before returning to the reception.
The combination of public embarrassment and personal hurt was overwhelming, and I needed space to process what had just happened and decide how to handle the remainder of the evening. As I stood in the restroom, looking at my reflection and trying to calm down, I realized that Marcus's behavior represented something larger than just sibling rivalry or wedding day stress. His willingness to humiliate me publicly, to dismiss my achievements and choices in front of our entire family, revealed the depth of his resentment about my independent success. He was still operating from the assumption that my role was to support his career, and my refusal to do so had triggered this cruel public retaliation, but I also realized something else. I was proud of what I had accomplished, proud of the car I had chosen, and proud of the independent life I had built. Marcus's attempt to shame me in front of our family said more about his own insecurities than it did about my choices. I decided to return to the reception with dignity, to continue enjoying the celebration, and to let my brother's behavior speak for itself. What I didn't know was that outside in the parking area, something was happening that would soon transform this painful moment into something entirely different. The valet who had been so enthusiastic about my Mustang was having a conversation with several of his colleagues, and their discussion was about to intersect with our family drama in ways that none of us could have anticipated. When I returned from the restroom, the reception had shifted into dinner service, and most family members were finding their assigned seats at elegantly decorated tables throughout the event hall. The temporary distraction of meal logistics had helped diffuse some of the tension from Marcus's outburst, but I could still feel curious glances from relatives who had witnessed our confrontation. I took my place at the family table, determined to maintain composure and enjoy the remainder of Rachel's celebration despite my brother's behavior. Marcus was already seated, appearing more subdued than he had during his earlier performance. Whether his change in demeanor was due to recognizing that he had gone too far or simply the natural progression of alcohol wearing off, I couldn't tell. Our parents flanked him protectively, their body language suggesting they were prepared to intervene if further conflict arose. The seating arrangement meant I was positioned directly across from Marcus, making it impossible to avoid eye contact throughout the meal. Dinner conversation remained carefully neutral, focusing on safe topics like Rachel's wedding planning, the beauty of the venue, and updates about various relatives' careers and families. Several cousins made efforts to include me in discussions about their own professional experiences, perhaps sensing that I needed support after the earlier confrontation. Their kindness was genuine and helped restore some of my confidence in family relationships, even as the immediate situation with Marcus remained unresolved. During the main course, my Uncle David leaned over to quietly express his opinion about what had transpired during cocktail hour. Marcus was out of line, he said simply, "Whatever issues you two have should be handled privately, not at someone else's wedding."
His validation was comforting, confirming that objective observers recognized Marcus's behavior as inappropriate regardless of any underlying family dynamics they might not fully understand. The evening continued with the traditional wedding celebration rituals, toasts from the bridal party, cake cutting, and the beginning of dancing as a live band took the stage in the reception area. The mood gradually lightened as guests focused on celebrating Rachel and her new husband, but I remained aware of the undercurrent of tension within our immediate family. Marcus avoided making eye contact with me, while our parents seemed to be carefully monitoring both of our behavior for signs of further conflict. As the dancing began and guests moved between the indoor reception area and outdoor terrace, I found myself gravitating toward conversations with relatives I saw infrequently. My cousin Jennifer, who worked in marketing for a technology company in Los Angeles, was particularly interested in hearing about venture capital trends and investment strategies. Her questions were informed and engaging, reminding me why I genuinely enjoyed discussing my work with people who could appreciate its complexity and significance. "Your analysis of market timing sounds incredibly sophisticated," Jennifer said as we watched other guests dance. "I had no idea venture capital required such deep technical knowledge combined with business strategy. It sounds much more challenging than I realized." Her genuine interest and respect for my expertise provided a welcome contrast to Marcus's dismissive attitude about my career. It was during this conversation that I noticed unusual activity in the parking area, visible through the reception hall's large windows. Several of the valet staff were gathered around a particular section of the lot, and their animated discussion suggested something noteworthy was happening. Other guests had begun to notice as well, with some pointing toward the parking area and speculating about what might be drawing the valet's attention. "I wonder what's happening out there," Jennifer observed, following my gaze toward the window. "It looks like they're all focused on one particular car." The comment sparked my curiosity, and I realized that the area of concentrated valet attention appeared to be near where my Mustang was parked. A small knot of anxiety formed in my stomach as I wondered if something had happened to my car during the reception. Excusing myself from the conversation, I walked toward the reception hall's main entrance to get a better view of the parking situation. Through the glass doors, I could see that 5 or 6 valet attendants were indeed gathered around my Mustang, but their body language suggested excitement rather than concern about damage or problems. They appeared to be examining the car closely, pointing at various details and engaging in enthusiastic discussion. The valet who had originally taken my keys, the young man who had been so knowledgeable about the GT350's specifications, seemed to be leading the discussion. He was gesturing toward different aspects of the car, while his colleagues listened with obvious interest. Occasionally one of them would lean in closer to examine a particular detail, and their collective enthusiasm suggested they were having the kind of detailed technical discussion that car enthusiasts enjoy. My concern about potential problems with the car began to give way to curiosity about what specifically had captured their attention so completely. Classic Mustangs often attracted admiration from car enthusiasts, but this level of focused interest from multiple people suggested something beyond routine appreciation for vintage automobiles. I considered walking outside to check on the situation directly, but was hesitant to interrupt what appeared to be an engaging conversation among people who clearly shared a passion for automotive history. The decision was made for me when the original valet noticed me watching through the glass doors and began walking purposefully toward the reception entrance. His expression was animated and excited, and he was carrying what appeared to be a smartphone, suggesting he had been researching something online. As he approached, I could see that his earlier professional demeanor had given way to genuine enthusiasm about whatever he had discovered. "Excuse me, Miss Chen," he said as he reached the entrance, his voice carrying the barely contained excitement of someone with important news to share. "I hope you don't mind me interrupting your evening, but I had to ask you something about your car." His respectful approach and obvious enthusiasm put me at ease, though I remained curious about what had prompted such focused attention from the entire valet staff. "Of course," I replied, stepping outside onto the venue's elegant front porch where we could speak privately. "Is everything all right with the Mustang?" The question reflected my lingering concern that something might have gone wrong, despite his excited demeanor suggesting otherwise. Everything is perfect with the car, he assured me quickly. Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. My colleagues and I have been examining it closely, and we think it might be something very special. More special than even we initially realized. His statement intrigued me, since he had already demonstrated impressive knowledge about Shelby GT350 side during our earlier conversation. He held up his smartphone, which displayed what appeared to be an automotive auction website. I've been researching the specific details of your car, the paint combination, the racing stripes, the interior specifications, everything we could see without opening anything up. Based on what we've found, we think your Mustang might be one of the extremely rare factory-built competition models. The suggestion caught me completely off guard. When I had purchased the car, the seller had described it as an exceptional example of a standard GT350, meticulously maintained and completely original. While we had discussed its provenance and history, there had been no indication that it might be anything beyond a very well-preserved example of an already rare and desirable model. What makes you think it might be a competition model? I asked, my curiosity now fully engaged. The documentation I have shows it as a standard GT350 from 1965. I was familiar with the basic history of Shelby Mustangs, but the specific variations and their distinguishing characteristics were beyond my expertise. Several things, he replied, his enthusiasm evident as he began to explain. First, the paint code and stripe combination you have is documented as being used on only a few dozen cars that were specially prepared for racing applications. Second, the interior stitching pattern and seat configuration matches what we see in competition models. And third, your car has some very subtle external modifications that were only done on cars intended for track use. He gestured toward the parking area where my Mustang was still surrounded by interested valets. The front spoiler design is slightly different from standard models. The rear window has a specific tinting pattern that was used to reduce glare for racing drivers, and the exhaust system appears to be the competition specification, rather than the standard setup. Individually, any of these details might not be definitive, but together they suggest something very special. The implications of what he was suggesting began to sink in. If my car was indeed one of the rare factory competition models, its value would be significantly higher than what I had paid, and its historical significance would be far greater than I had realized. More immediately relevant to the current evening's events, it would mean that Marcus's dismissive characterization of my car as embarrassing junk was not just wrong but spectacularly uninformed. How certain are you about this assessment? I asked, trying to process the potential significance of his observations. Is there a way to verify whether it's actually a competition model rather than a standard GT350 that happens to have similar features? The question reflected both excitement about the possibility and caution about drawing premature conclusions based on visual inspection alone. That's actually why I wanted to talk to you, he replied, his excitement building. My name is Tyler Martinez, and I should mention that I'm not just a valet. I'm actually a graduate student in automotive engineering at UC Davis, and I work part-time for classic car authentication services. What we do during the week is verify the provenance and specifications of vintage cars for collectors, auction houses, and insurance companies. This revelation added significant credibility to his assessment. Rather than relying on the observations of an enthusiastic amateur, I was receiving professional analysis from someone with both academic credentials and practical experience in automotive authentication. The coincidence of having an expert evaluator working as a valet at my cousin's wedding seemed almost too fortunate to believe. Based on my professional experience, Tyler continued, I'm confident that your car has characteristics that warrant detailed documentation and verification. If you're interested, I'd be happy to conduct a comprehensive authentication analysis. It would involve detailed photography, measurement of specific components, verification of serial numbers, and comparison with factory documentation to establish definitively whether this is a competition model. The offer was intriguing both for its potential financial implications and for the personal satisfaction of learning more about something I had already grown to love. However, I was also aware that we were in the middle of my cousin's wedding reception, and conducting detailed automotive research seemed inappropriate for the current setting. I'm definitely interested in learning more, I replied, but perhaps we should focus on the wedding celebration for now, and discuss this further at another time. The suggestion seemed reasonable, allowing me to gather Tyler's contact information without disrupting the evening's festivities. Actually, Tyler said with a slightly mischievous smile, there's one thing I could check right now that would give us a pretty definitive answer. Competition models had a specific identification plate mounted in a location that's not visible from outside the car, but can be accessed without any disassembly. If you wouldn't mind letting me take a quick look, we could know for certain within just a few minutes. The proposition was tempting, particularly given the potential significance of the answer. If my car was indeed a rare competition model, it would provide satisfying vindication against Marcus's harsh criticism, while also representing a remarkable stroke of good fortune in my purchase decision. The verification would take only a few minutes and wouldn't significantly disrupt my participation in the wedding reception. All right, I agreed, curiosity overcoming my reluctance to focus on anything other than Rachel's celebration. Let's take a look. Tyler's professional enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself genuinely excited about the possibility of discovering something extraordinary about a car I had already grown to appreciate deeply. We walked toward the parking area, where Tyler's colleagues were still gathered around my Mustang in animated discussion. As we approached, I could hear fragments of their conversation, technical terminology about engine specifications, suspension modifications, and racing heritage that suggested these valets shared a serious passion for automotive history and engineering. Everyone, this is Sarah Chen, the owner of the GT350, Tyler announced, as we joined the group. I've explained our suspicions about the car's provenance, and she's given permission for us to check the identification plate. His colleagues responded with obvious excitement, as if they were about to witness the verification of a significant discovery. Tyler opened the driver's side door and carefully positioned himself to access an area under the dashboard that wasn't visible from normal seating position. Using a small flashlight from his keychain, he illuminated a section of the car's structure while his colleagues watched with anticipation. The moment stretched as he carefully examined whatever was hidden in the shadows. Holy shit, Tyler breathed, his professional composure momentarily overwhelmed by surprise. He immediately caught himself and looked up apologetically. Sorry for the language, but you need to see this. The excitement in his voice was unmistakable as he gestured for me to position myself where I could see what he had discovered. Looking into the illuminated area, I could see a small metal plate with stamped numbers and letters that meant nothing to me but were clearly significant to Tyler and his colleagues. The plate appeared to be original to the car, showing appropriate aging and patina, and was mounted in a location that would be extremely difficult to counterfeit or modify without extensive mechanical work. This is the factory competition identification plate, Tyler explained, his voice carrying the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts.
The serial number indicates this car was one of 34 GT350 CES that were specially modified by Shelby American for racing applications. These cars were never sold to the public originally, they were only provided to professional racing teams and selected drivers. The implications of his discovery were staggering. Not only was my car significantly rarer and more valuable than I had realized, but it had genuine racing heritage and historical significance that placed it among the most desirable classic American automobiles ever produced. The car Marcus had dismissed as embarrassing junk was actually an automotive treasure that most collectors could only dream of owning. How did this end up being sold as a standard GT350? I asked, still processing the magnitude of what we had discovered. Shouldn't the seller have known what it was? The question reflected both amazement at my good fortune and confusion about how such a significant car could have been misidentified. It happens more often than you'd think, Tyler replied. Many of these competition cars were sold off by racing teams after their competitive careers ended, and the documentation didn't always follow the cars. Over the decades, some ended up in the hands of owners who appreciated them as classic Mustangs without realizing their specific racing provenance.
The seller probably had no idea what they were parting with. One of Tyler's colleagues, who had been silently documenting our discovery with careful photographs, looked up from his camera with an expression of awe. "Sarah, do you realize what you've got here? This isn't just a rare car, it's automotive history. This specific car probably competed in professional races during the mid-1960s. It's likely that famous drivers sat in that same seat and pushed this car to its limits on famous racetracks." The romantic notion of owning a piece of racing history added emotional significance to what was already an extraordinary discovery. The idea that my car had been driven in anger by professional racers, that it had competed at legendary tracks, that it represented the pinnacle of American performance engineering during a golden era of motorsports, transformed my relationship with the vehicle entirely. "There's more," Tyler continued, consulting his smartphone where he had pulled up additional research. "Based on the serial number and our records, this car was originally delivered to a racing team that competed in the Trans Am series. It's possible that this car was driven by some of the most famous drivers of that era, people like Bob Bondurant or Ken Miles." The names meant something to me from my earlier research into Mustang history, legendary drivers whose exploits had helped establish Ford's performance reputation during the muscle car era. The possibility that my car had been piloted by such figures added another layer of significance to an already remarkable situation. "What's this worth?" I asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. "I mean, if it's authenticated properly and documented as a genuine competition car, what kind of value are we talking about?" The question was partly practical curiosity and partly amazement at the potential financial implications of my accidental discovery. Tyler exchanged glances with his colleagues before answering. "Conservatively, and assuming full authentication, you're looking at somewhere between $800,000 and $1.2 million. If it can be connected to specific famous races or drivers, potentially more. These cars are among the holy grails of American muscle car collecting." The number was so far beyond what I had paid for the car that it seemed almost fictional. I had purchased what I thought was a well-preserved example of a desirable classic for about $80,000. To learn that it might be worth more than 10 times that amount was overwhelming in ways I hadn't anticipated. More immediately relevant to the evening's events was the irony that Marcus had publicly humiliated me by dismissing this same car as worthless junk. His criticism hadn't just been wrong, it had been spectacularly, embarrassingly wrong in ways that would be difficult for him to live down once the truth became known. "Would you be willing to document this discovery?" I asked, Tyler, an idea beginning to form. "I mean, would you be willing to provide written authentication of what we've found here, something that establishes the car's actual provenance and significance?" The request was motivated partly by the desire for official documentation and partly by a growing sense that this discovery might provide an opportunity to address Marcus's earlier behavior. "Absolutely," Tyler replied enthusiastically. "This is exactly the kind of discovery that makes our work exciting. I'll prepare a preliminary authentication report based on tonight's findings, and we can schedule a more comprehensive analysis at my lab next week. The preliminary report alone should be sufficient to establish the car's basic provenance and approximate value." As Tyler and his colleagues began the process of documenting their findings with detailed photographs and measurements, I found myself contemplating how to handle this information within the context of my family dynamics. Marcus's public criticism had been designed to embarrass me and minimize my achievements, but it had backfired in ways he couldn't have anticipated. The discovery also vindicated my decision-making process in purchasing the car. What Marcus had characterized as showing off or making poor financial choices was revealed to be an exceptionally astute investment, even though the car's true value had been unknown to me at the time of purchase. My research and careful evaluation had led me to select something extraordinary, even if I hadn't fully understood its significance initially. After about 20 minutes of detailed documentation, Tyler approached with a satisfied expression and a folder of photographs and preliminary notes. "I've got enough information to prepare an initial authentication report," he announced. "Based on what we've verified tonight, I'm confident that this is genuine factory competition GT350, and the documentation will support that conclusion. How long will it take to prepare the preliminary report?" I asked, my mind already working on how to time its revelation for maximum impact on the current family situation. Is this something you could have ready by tomorrow, or does it require more extensive research? I can have a preliminary report ready by tomorrow afternoon. Tyler assured me it won't be the comprehensive analysis that would be required for insurance or auction purposes, but it will definitively establish the car's competition provenance and provide a reliable estimate of its current market value. The full authentication process would take longer, but the preliminary findings are conclusive. The timing was perfect for what I was beginning to plan. Rather than confronting Marcus immediately about his embarrassing mistake in front of our extended family, I could let him continue believing that he had successfully humiliated me, then reveal the truth in a way that would demonstrate not just his error but the extent of his ignorance about something he had criticized so harshly. I'd appreciate both the preliminary report and your contact information for the comprehensive authentication, I told Tyler. This has been an incredible discovery, and I'm grateful for your expertise and enthusiasm. The professional relationship we were establishing would provide ongoing support for whatever decisions I made about the car's future. Tyler handed me his business card along with a folder containing the photographs and notes from the evening's investigation. It's been a privilege to be part of this discovery, he said sincerely. Cars like this are why I got into automotive authentication in the first place. The combination of engineering excellence, racing heritage, and historical significance makes this a truly special automobile. As I walked back toward the reception, folder in hand, I reflected on the evening's dramatic turn of events. What had begun as a humiliating public criticism from my brother had evolved into the discovery that I owned one of the most significant American performance cars ever built. The irony was almost too perfect to believe. The reception was still in full swing when I returned to the event hall, with guests dancing and celebrating Rachel's marriage with continued enthusiasm. The atmosphere remained festive and joyful, providing cover for my private excitement about the discovery that had just taken place in the parking area. Most family members seemed unaware that anything significant had occurred outside, focused instead on the evening's official celebrations. I found my way back to the family table, where Marcus was engaged in conversation with our cousin David about technology trends and startup challenges. His demeanor had improved considerably since our earlier confrontation, possibly due to the passage of time, the influence of good wine, or simply the generally positive atmosphere of the wedding celebration. He seemed relaxed and confident, apparently comfortable with how our earlier conflict had resolved. "There you are," my mother said as I rejoined the table. "We were wondering where you had disappeared to." Her tone was neutral but carried a slight undertone of concern, possibly reflecting worry that I might have left the reception early due to upset over Marcus's behavior. "Just getting some fresh air and checking on my car," I replied truthfully, though without revealing the significance of what that check had uncovered. "The valets here really know their classic automobiles." The comment was casual enough to avoid drawing attention but set up potential for later revelation of the evening's discoveries. Marcus looked up from his conversation with a slightly puzzled expression. "The valets were interested in your car?" he asked, his tone carrying a hint of the same dismissiveness he had displayed earlier. "I wouldn't think a 40-year-old Mustang would be that noteworthy to people who handle luxury cars all the time." His comment provided an opening that I chose not to pursue immediately. Instead, I simply smiled and nodded. "They seem to think it was worth a closer look," I replied mildly, enjoying the private knowledge that his assessment of the situation was as inaccurate as his earlier criticism of the car itself. The evening continued with the traditional wedding reception activities, but I found myself anticipating the moment when Tyler's authentication report would be ready and I could decide how to share this information with my family. The knowledge that Marcus's harsh criticism had been so fundamentally wrong provided a sense of satisfaction that helped offset the embarrassment I had felt during his earlier public performance. As the reception wound down and guests began to say their goodbyes, I made arrangements to retrieve my car from the valet station. Tyler was on duty and personally brought the Mustang around, treating it with the reverence appropriate for a newly discovered automotive treasure. His colleagues gathered to watch as he carefully positioned the car and handed me the keys with obvious respect. "I'll have that preliminary report ready by tomorrow afternoon." Tyler reminded me as I prepared to leave. This has been one of the most exciting discoveries of my career. Thank you for letting us be part of it. His genuine enthusiasm and professional expertise had transformed what could have been a routine wedding reception into an evening of genuine discovery and vindication. The drive home through the darkened wine country gave me time to process everything that had happened. The evening had begun with Marcus's public humiliation of my car and by extension my judgment and success. It was ending with the discovery that the car he had criticized so harshly was actually an automotive masterpiece worth more than most people's houses. The irony was almost too perfect, but it also represented something larger about our family dynamics and Marcus's tendency to dismiss things he didn't understand. His criticism had been based on superficial assessment and personal resentment rather than genuine knowledge or expertise. The discovery of the car's true nature revealed not just his specific error but his broader pattern of minimizing my achievements and choices. As I pulled into my San Francisco garage and carefully parked what I now knew was an extraordinarily valuable and historically significant automobile, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with money or revenge. The evening had validated not just my car purchase but my entire approach to making thoughtful research decisions about things that mattered to me. Marcus had attempted to embarrass me by characterizing my success and choices as showing off or poor judgment. Instead, he had revealed his own ignorance and willingness to publicly criticize things he knew nothing about. The authentication report Tyler was preparing would provide irrefutable documentation of just how wrong he had been, but the personal satisfaction of being vindicated was already complete. The next morning brought a text message from Tyler confirming that he had completed the preliminary authentication report and would email it by early afternoon. The anticipation of receiving official documentation of my car's significance kept me energized throughout a day that might otherwise have been spent recovering from wedding festivities and family drama. When the report arrived, it was even more comprehensive and conclusive than I had expected. Tyler had researched not just the car's factory specifications but its subsequent racing history, documenting its participation in specific Trans Am races and its connection to legendary drivers and racing teams. The car had indeed been driven by famous racers and had competed at renowned tracks throughout the mid-1960s. The estimated value range Tyler provided was conservative but still staggering, between $800,000 and $1.2 million depending on the level of documentation and authentication that could be established. Even the low end of the range represented more than 10 times what I had paid for the car, making it one of the most successful automotive investments in recent history. More satisfying than the financial implications was the historical significance Tyler had uncovered. My Mustang wasn't just a rare car, it was a piece of American racing heritage that had been driven in anger by some of the greatest drivers of the muscle car era. The knowledge that I owned something with such authentic motorsports provenance made me appreciate the car on an entirely new level. The question now was how to share this information with my family, particularly with Marcus, whose harsh criticism the previous evening had been so spectacularly wrong. The temptation to simply send him Tyler's report with a brief note was strong, but I wanted to handle the situation in a way that would be satisfying without being unnecessarily cruel or vindictive. The opportunity presented itself when Marcus called me that evening, apparently motivated by either genuine remorse about his behavior or concern about potential ongoing family consequences. His tone was conciliatory, though not quite apologetic, as he attempted to address the previous evening's conflict without fully acknowledging his own responsibility for it. "I wanted to talk about last night," he began carefully.
Things got a little heated, and maybe we both said things we shouldn't have. His attempt to characterize the situation as mutual conflict, rather than his unilateral attack, was typical of his approach to accepting responsibility for his behavior. "I think what happened was pretty one-sided, Marcus," I replied calmly. "You publicly criticized my car and my judgment in front of our entire extended family. I didn't say anything inappropriate in response. The correction was gentle but firm, establishing the actual facts of what had occurred rather than accepting his revisionist version. Look, maybe I was a little harsh about the car thing," he conceded reluctantly.
But you have to understand how it looks when you show up to family events with expensive toys while lecturing everyone else about responsible financial decisions. His partial acknowledgement was immediately undermined by justification that mischaracterized both my behavior and my car purchase. "Actually, Marcus, that's something I wanted to discuss with you," I said, deciding that the moment was right for revelation. "It turns out that my car attracted quite a bit of professional attention last night. One of the valets is actually an automotive authentication specialist, and he made some interesting discoveries about what I've been driving." There was a brief pause before Marcus responded, his tone carrying a hint of concern that suggested he was beginning to realize his criticism might have been premature. "What kind of discoveries?" he asked, his earlier confidence noticeably diminished. "It turns out that what you called embarrassing junk is actually one of 34 factory-built Shelby competition cars from 1965, I explained, letting the information sink in before continuing. "It's a genuine racing car that was driven by professional drivers in Trans Am competitions during the 1960s. The authentication specialist estimates its current value at somewhere between $800,000 and $1.2 million. The silence that followed was profound and extended, suggesting that Marcus was processing the full implications of what I had just revealed. His harsh criticism the previous evening hadn't just been wrong, it had been spectacularly embarrassingly wrong in ways that demonstrated his complete ignorance about something he had judged so confidently and publicly. "Are you sure about this?" he finally asked, his voice smaller than it had been moments before. "I mean, how do you know this authentication specialist knows what he's talking about?" The questions reflected desperate hope that the information might be inaccurate rather than genuine curiosity about the verification process. "I have the preliminary authentication report right here," I replied, matter-of-factly, complete with documentation of the car's racing provenance, photographs of the factory competition identification plate, and detailed analysis of its specifications and historical significance. "The specialist is a graduate student in automotive engineering who works professionally in classic car authentication. His credentials are impeccable." The revelation had clearly knocked Marcus off balance, forcing him to confront not just the error of his specific criticism, but the broader implications of his willingness to publicly judge things he knew nothing about. The car he had dismissed as worthless was revealed to be more valuable than most people's houses, and more historically significant than he could have imagined. "I had no idea," he said quietly, his earlier defensiveness replaced by something approaching genuine contrition. "I mean, how was I supposed to know it was something special? It looked like just an old Mustang to me." His attempt to rationalize his error by claiming ignorance only highlighted the inappropriateness of his harsh public criticism based on superficial assessment. "That's exactly the point, Marcus," I replied gently but firmly. "You judged something harshly and publicly, without knowing what you were talking about, just like you've done with my career, my choices, and my decisions for years. Maybe this experience will help you understand why that approach is problematic." The conversation marked a turning point in our relationship, forcing Marcus to confront patterns of behavior that had characterized our interactions for years. His willingness to dismiss my achievements and criticize my choices had always been based more on resentment and assumption than genuine knowledge or understanding. The authentication of my car had provided dramatic vindication, but more importantly, it had created an opportunity for honest discussion about our family dynamics and his tendency to minimize things he didn't comprehend. The discovery had transformed a moment of humiliation into a teaching moment that might finally lead to more respectful interactions between us. Our conversation ended with Marcus promising to call me back after he had time to process what I had told him about the car's true nature. The next few days passed quietly, giving both of us space to consider the implications of what had been revealed. I used the time to arrange for Tyler's comprehensive authentication analysis and to research the full history of my newly discovered automotive treasure. Tyler's detailed investigation exceeded even his initial enthusiasm. The comprehensive authentication revealed that my GT350 had been driven by Ken Miles himself during the 1965 racing season, participating in victories at several major tracks including Laguna Seca and Road America. The documentation Tyler uncovered included period photographs of the car in racing configuration, complete with miles behind the wheel during competition. "This isn't just a competition car," Tyler explained during our meeting at his authentication facility. "This is a piece of American racing legend. Ken Miles was one of the greatest drivers of his era, and having a car with this level of documented provenance puts it in the absolute top tier of collectible American automobiles." His professional assessment confirmed that my accidental purchase had been extraordinarily fortunate. The updated valuation reflected the car's enhanced provenance, with estimates ranging from $1.5 to $2 million at auction. The financial implications were staggering, but more meaningful to me was the knowledge that I owned something with genuine historical significance, a car that had been piloted by a racing legend during the golden age of American motorsports. Marcus called 3 days after our initial conversation, his tone noticeably different from his usual confident demeanor. "I've been thinking about what you told me about the car," he began hesitantly. "And about what I said at the wedding. I owe you an apology, Sarah. A real one, not the half-hearted thing I tried before." His acknowledgement was more direct and genuine than I had expected, suggesting that the revelation about the car had forced him to reconsider not just his specific criticism, but his broader approach to our relationship. "I was wrong about the car, obviously," he continued, "but I was also wrong about how I treated you. I've been resentful about your success for years, and I took it out on you in the worst possible way." The confession represented a level of self-awareness and honesty that Marcus had rarely demonstrated before. "I convinced myself that your achievements were somehow less significant than mine because they weren't technical innovations," he admitted. "But building a successful career in venture capital requires skills I don't have and knowledge I don't possess. I was threatened by your success and dealt with it by trying to diminish it." Our conversation that day lasted nearly 2 hours, covering years of accumulated misunderstandings and resentments. Marcus acknowledged that his public criticism at the wedding had been motivated more by jealousy than genuine concern about my financial decisions. He also admitted that his dismissal of my career had been based on ignorance rather than informed assessment. "The car thing just made it impossible to ignore how wrong I've been," he said near the end of our call. "If I could be so spectacularly wrong about something as straightforward as evaluating a car, how wrong have I been about everything else? Your career, your judgment, your decisions. I've been an arrogant ass, and I'm sorry." The apology was more comprehensive and sincere than anything I had received from Marcus since we were children. It opened the door to rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect rather than competition and resentment. The process wouldn't be immediate or easy, but his willingness to acknowledge his mistakes provided hope for genuine improvement. 2 weeks later, our family gathered for Sunday dinner at our parents' house, the first time we had all been together since the wedding. The atmosphere was notably different, with Marcus treating me with a level of respect and genuine interest that had been absent for years. He asked thoughtful questions about my work and listened to my responses without the dismissive attitude that had previously characterized our interactions. "I told Mom and Dad about the car," Marcus said during a private moment in the kitchen. "About what it actually is and what it's worth." Dad nearly choked on his coffee when I explained the valuation. His willingness to share the story with our parents, including his own error in judgment, demonstrated a level of humility I hadn't seen from him before. Our parents' reaction to learning about the car's true nature was a mixture of amazement and pride. They struggled to comprehend the financial implications, but were clearly impressed by the historical significance of what I had accidentally acquired. More importantly, the revelation seemed to help them understand that my success extended beyond just making money to include making exceptionally good decisions about complex situations. "We never really understood what Sarah does for work," my mother admitted during dinner. "But if she can identify valuable opportunities that other people miss, she must be very good at what she does." The comment represented a level of appreciation for my professional skills that had been largely absent throughout my career. The authentication process continued for several more weeks, with Tyler working to document every aspect of the car's provenance and racing history. The final report was a comprehensive document that traced the car from its original delivery to the racing team through its various owners over the decades, concluding with its current status as one of the most documented and valuable American competition cars in existence. Tyler's work also attracted attention from the broader automotive community. Several major auction houses expressed interest in representing the car if I ever decided to sell, while automotive museums inquired about potential loans for special exhibitions. The level of professional interest confirmed that my accidental purchase had indeed been something extraordinary. The car's fame led to unexpected opportunities in my professional life as well. Several high-net-worth clients of Pacific Ventures, learning about my automotive discovery, began seeking my advice on classic car investments. The expertise I had developed through Tyler's education became valuable in new ways, opening doors to investment opportunities in the collector car market. Marcus's startup, meanwhile, had progressed successfully through its accelerator program and was beginning to show real promise. Our improved relationship allowed me to provide genuine support and advice when he asked for it, without the resentment and competition that had previously poisoned our interactions. I was able to make introductions to potential investors and offer strategic guidance based on my experience with early-stage companies. The transformation in our family dynamics was gradual but sustained. Marcus's public acknowledgement of his mistakes and his genuine efforts to change his behavior had created space for honest communication and mutual support. Our parents, witnessing the improvement in our relationship and gaining better understanding of my professional achievements, began treating us as equals rather than maintaining the favoritism that had characterized our childhood. 6 months after the wedding, Tyler completed his authentication work with a final surprise. His research had uncovered documentation proving that my car had won its class at the 1965 24 Hours of Daytona, driven by Ken Miles and Lloyd Ruby. The victory added another layer of historical significance and pushed the car's estimated value above $2 million. This is one of the most significant American race cars still in private hands, Tyler explained as he presented the final documentation. You don't just own a valuable classic, you own a piece of motorsports history that will never lose its significance. His years of research had revealed a story more remarkable than anyone could have imagined. The irony that Marcus had dismissed a Daytona-winning race car as embarrassing junk never lost its impact on our family dynamics. The story became legendary among our relatives, serving as a permanent reminder about the dangers of judging things without understanding them. Marcus accepted the ongoing gentle ribbing with grace, using it as motivation to approach other situations with more humility and careful consideration. The car itself remained my daily joy and occasional transportation, though I was more careful about where and when I drove it, given its extraordinary value. The knowledge of its racing heritage made every drive feel like a connection to automotive history, while its proven investment value provided financial security I had never imagined possible. My venture capital career continued to flourish, with the car story becoming part of my professional legend in Silicon Valley investment circles. The narrative of accidentally acquiring a multi-million-dollar automotive treasure while building expertise in identifying undervalued opportunities resonated with entrepreneurs and investors who understood the parallels between my two areas of expertise. Marcus and I developed a genuine friendship for the first time since childhood, built on mutual respect and appreciation rather than competition and resentment. His technical brilliance and my business acumen became complementary strengths we could both appreciate, and our parents finally understood that we had each found our own paths to success and fulfillment. The wedding that had begun with public humiliation had ultimately led to discovery, vindication, and family healing that exceeded anything I could have hoped for. The valet who asked for my autograph that night had given me something far more valuable than authentication. He had provided the key to transforming a painful moment into the foundation for genuine family reconciliation and personal triumph. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.